The clatter of glass on stone rang out like a shot through the Sunday quiet of Flaxborough's market square. Heads turned. Conversation ceased. A tea tray tilted in mid-air and spilled its contents in a graceful arc across the cobbles. At the center of it all, sprawled and seething beneath a gilt-edged sandwich board that had once advertised coronation photographs, 2/6 a print, lay Mr. Eustace Thrip, Flaxborough's most combative photographer and chairman of the Camera Club. Self-appointed. His carefully oiled mustache was askew, his waistcoat rumpled, and at his feet, like the aftermath of a biblical smiting, were the jagged remains of a photographic glass plate. It gleamed where it had cracked cleanly down the middle, revealing, bizarrely, the partial image of someone's knees. "Outrageous," Thrip sputtered, addressing no one in particular but glaring at the church facade, the butter stall, and a passing vicar's wife with equal fury. "This is a deliberate attack on art." By then, half the town was gathered. A woman in a mauve turban was first to report it to her friend. He was setting up outside the butcher's. For what? A portrait of sirloin? No, it was Miss Winks he was photographing. Said it was for the Calendar Girls entry. Came a tart correction. Well, I heard he was trying to sell plates to the Gazette. Called it Candid Civic Life. Ha! Civic my foot. He's been hanging round that widow from Eastby Crescent again, hasn't he? I saw him in the alley behind the library 3 nights ago, with a tripod. It's the mayor's fault. Ever since he cut funding to the Historical Society, Eustace has been freelancing like a lunatic. Just as someone began miming a suggestive lens zoom, Purbright appeared with his usual air of polite detachment, stepping between gossipers like a man avoiding puddles. He glanced down at the shattered plate and knelt briefly. A faint whirl of soot, or ink, clung to one of the shards. Near it, a small rectangular object gleamed dull brass. It looked like a lens cap, but with a curious symbol engraved. An ornate letter OR in a circle. Sergeant Love, trotting up and already winded, looked from Thrip to the debris and asked, "Did someone push him, sir? Or was it a gust?" Thrip was bellowing at the lamp-post now, convinced someone had tampered with his easel. Sabotaged. That stand's never collapsed on its own in 20 years. "Perhaps," said Purbright mildly, picking up the strange lens cap and holding it to the light. "But if you photograph long enough in a small town, you're bound to capture more than you intended." Love blinked. "You mean someone didn't want their photo taken? Or," Purbright added with the faintest smile, "someone didn't want the wrong photo found." Just then, a shriek rang from the other side of the square. Mrs. Fernwick, the florist, had flung open her shop door with the force of a matinee curtain call and was waving a long envelope in one hand like a surrender flag. "I've had this pushed under my door," she cried, "and it's addressed to you, Mr. Thrip, only the name's been scratched out, and it says, 'Do not forget the plate, or else.'" The crowd gasped in collective delight, as if someone had passed round Eccles cakes and scandal all in one breath. Purbright, without raising his voice, simply said, "Sergeant, I believe we'll start with the envelope and the remains of Mr. Thrip's dignity." Both appeared to have been forcibly delivered. The camera, forgotten in the confusion, still stood upright, its lens cracked but pointing steadily toward the steps of the town hall, where, as Purbright quietly noted, there had been no event that morning at all. The envelope, once it had been safely retrieved from Mrs. Fernwick's quivering fingers and carried into the more temperate environment of the police station's back office, proved to be a curious thing in itself. Thick cream stock, the sort used for wedding invitations or funeral notices, and sealed not with gum, but with what appeared to be a pressed thumb smeared in ink. No stamp, no postmark, just the words, "Do not forget the plate, or else," scrawled across the flap in an angular, impatient hand. Inside was a single item, a small photograph, no more than 3 inches square. It showed the alley behind the Flaxborough Public Library. Empty, except for a bicycle with one pedal missing, and in the upper corner, what looked like the hem of a long coat vanishing out of frame. Sergeant Love turned it over in his fingers with the delicacy of someone handling a live wasp. "Not exactly blackmail material, is it?" "Depends," said Purbright, seated beside him, "on who's behind the coat and what they were doing just before leaving the frame." He reached for the lens cap found earlier. Now wiped clean, the small R was clearer, serifed and stylized in a way that evoked something theatrical, or at least self-important. "Recognize the monogram, Love?" The sergeant frowned. "Might be from the Rotary Club, or one of those rehearsal societies. They're always embossing things. Could be something to do with the repertory players." "That would certainly explain the drama," Purbright murmured, placing the cap beside the photo. "Eustace Thrip may have captured something, or someone, not meant for public display." Love looked doubtful. "You think this plate, the one that smashed, held something damaging?" "More likely it held something embarrassing," Purbright replied. "And in Flaxborough, the distinction is often academic." They were interrupted by a knock at the door and the sudden entry of Miss Winks, junior librarian and recent subject of Thrip's more respectable lens work. She carried herself with the unflappable dignity of someone who spent her days whispering at teenagers and alphabetizing overdue notices. "I heard about the incident," she said, setting her handbag on the edge of the desk as if it might contaminate her coat. "I thought it best to mention something. Mr. Thrip took a photograph of me yesterday morning for the calendar, but he insisted on using an old glass plate instead of his modern camera." "Did he say why?" Purbright asked. "He mumbled something about needing real depth, and something else, that it had to be the same plate he used back in '49, for authenticity." "Did he show you the plate before taking the photo?" "He tried to, but I didn't understand much. It looked like an ordinary sheet of smoked glass with numbers etched in one corner." Love perked up. "Numbers? Yes. Faded, but there. 311A, or maybe 371A. I didn't make much of it." Purbright scribbled the sequence down on a blotter. "Thank you, Miss Winks. One last thing. Was anyone else nearby when the photograph was taken?" She hesitated. "Well, yes. Mr. Toseland passed by. He's the stage manager at the theater, you know. And Mr. Thrip called after him, said something odd." "What sort of odd?" "He said, 'Remember this angle, Norman. This is the one they couldn't get in court.'" Purbright and Love exchanged a glance. Miss Winks, unaware of the ripple she'd just caused, snapped her handbag shut. "I do hope Mr. Thrip's not in trouble. I'd hate to lose my spot in the calendar. I was going to be September." She left with the air of a woman departing an impromptu garden club meeting rather than a police interview. Love scratched behind his ear. "Court, sir? Seems Mr. Thrip's photographic history may be richer than expected. Do we have records on the 1949 trial of—" Purbright paused, tapping the paper. "Whatever incident that plate belonged to." Love frowned. 1949. Could be the Toseland inquiry. There was that dust-up over missing council theatre funds. Purbright nodded slowly. "I believe we'll need to speak with Mr. Toseland next, and perhaps revisit the library alley in daylight." As they prepared to head out, the constable on duty poked his head in. "Message just came from Mrs. Fernwick again. Says someone's now returned the other half of the broken plate. Placed it on her doorstep in a brown paper bag." Purbright stood. Flaxborough's sense of drama never disappoints. They arrived at Mrs. Fernwick's shop just in time to see her gesticulating at two girl guides who, wrongly accused of mischief, looked near tears. On the counter, wrapped in oily brown paper, lay the second half of the shattered plate. Only this fragment was different. The image it bore was not of knees or pavement, but of a hand, gloved, reaching into a box. On the side of the box, clearly visible in raised lettering, were the words, "Flaxborough District Court Records, Archive A." The gloved hand in the photograph hovered just above the edge of the box, fingers curled in an awkward, hesitant claw. Even through the smudges on the glass fragment, it was a striking image. Crisp, unposed, almost furtive. Purbright studied it beneath the police station's reading lamp, while Sergeant Love attempted to match the visible lettering to municipal records. Archive A, Love repeated, flipping through a dusty catalogue. That'd be the council's off-site storage. Old tram line shed by the canal. They keep court overflow and theatre permits out there. Purbright looked up. Theatrical permits? Yes, sir. Scripts, prop inventories, that sort of thing. The repertory players use it when the town hall's full of wreaths or voting booths. Interesting. Purbright turned the shard slightly. Tell me, Love, would the 1949 Toesland case be stored in Archive A? Love flipped back 3 pages, jabbed a finger. It would, sir. Case 371A. That's what Miss Winks mentioned, the numbers etched on the plate. Then Thripp's claim about this angle may be literal. He recreated the composition of a suppressed photograph, or possibly the original plate was from that trial. Love scratched his chin. But why smash it then, if it's important? Purbright gestured toward the envelope from earlier. Someone thought he shouldn't have it, or rather, shouldn't use it. They smashed the plate in public, sent a warning, and then, rather oddly, returned the other half, almost as if they wanted to draw attention, not bury it. But who'd want to do that? Love asked, and more importantly, why now? They found Mr. Norman Toesland in the wings of the Flaxborough Repertory Theatre, busily applying wood glue to a piece of faux marble column. It was a quiet afternoon, the sort that suited both rehearsals and interrogations. He greeted them with the flamboyant weariness of a man who'd once played Lear in a hall that smelled of boiled cabbage. "Eustace Thripp?" he said, not looking up. "Yes, I know him. Overambitious behind a lens. Theatrical instincts, terrible timing. Why, what's he done? Photographed another magistrate mid-nap?" "He's had an accident," Purbright said evenly, "involving a glass plate, one he claimed dated back to 1949. Ring any bells?" Toesland's hands paused mid-glue. Plenty of bells in 1949. Most of them sounded during the inquiry into those missing funds. Nasty business. Nearly lost my role in Blithe Spirit. Was a photograph involved? Toesland smiled thinly. There was meant to be. Thripp had taken a shot of the prop safe, one we used for our production of The Magistrate. Someone alleged it showed certain council checks being locked away. Trouble is, the photo was never produced. Plate went missing. And if that plate turned up again? Purbright asked. Toesland blew on the glue joint. Depends who found it. The mayor at the time buried it, claimed it was inadmissible. Bit of a ruckus. The council swept it under the carpet, and the carpet's never been lifted. Is there any reason Thripp would want to revisit that moment now? Thripp always wanted to be more than a wedding snapper, Toesland said. He liked exposing people. Said his camera didn't lie, only his subjects did. Purbright looked thoughtful. And the monogrammed lens cap we found? Are in a circle. Familiar? Could be Reg Tamlin's. He did the lighting for us back then. Used to emboss all his gear. Always said he'd catch someone in the act one day. Shame he died before he managed it. Where is his equipment now? Mixed into storage, I imagine. Toesland shrugged. Unless someone nabbed it from Archive A. Outside, Love exhaled in the cool air. So we've got a long-dead lighting man, a missing trial plate, and someone smashing photography in public. You think Thripp was trying to revive the scandal? Or, Purbright said, he stumbled into it again by accident. Obsession is often the best alibi. As they returned to the station, a message awaited them. The mayor, Councillor Mildred Dapp, wished to speak with Purbright at once. She would not, the message added, be kept waiting beyond this afternoon. Love grimaced. Think she's heard about the envelope? No, Purbright replied, folding his coat. She's heard something worse. She's heard the past is back on stage. But just as they prepared to leave, another call came through, this one from the station cleaner, a Mrs. Callow, who had been tidying the evidence room. In a low voice, she explained that someone had slipped a second envelope under the back door during lunch. No note this time. Just a contact sheet of 4 photos, all grainy, all taken indoors, and one of them unmistakably showed someone in a judge's wig removing a folder marked confidential from a court evidence box. The wig was theatrical. The man inside it was not. The photograph with the wig was grainy, yes, but the shape of the chin beneath it, sharp, slightly retracted as if caught mid-turn, was unmistakable. Councillor Mildred Dapp, Flaxborough's current mayor and former clerk of court, had not aged much in the last quarter-century, though she had, notably, grown bolder with accessories. The image showed her in a theatrical wig and robes, plucking a folder from a court box marked Confidential 371A. Sergeant Love stared at the contact sheet as though it might declare itself a forgery if glared at hard enough. "It's not. It can't be." Purbright, standing by the window with a view of the vicarage roses, simply nodded once. "It's her, and it means we've moved from eccentric mischief to official misconduct. Retrospective, perhaps, but no less pungent for its age." "Do we confront her, sir?" "No, not yet. People don't admit to old crimes without context, or at least a curtain call." Purbright slipped the sheet into an evidence envelope and checked his watch. "We'll keep our appointment." They arrived at the mayor's office to find Councillor Dapp seated behind her oversized oak desk like a portrait of civic endurance. She wore a navy suit with a brooch shaped like a lighthouse and regarded the detectives with an expression that had seen off planning complaints, budget cuts, and at least 2 attempts to shorten council prayers. "I assume you're here because Eustace Thrip has lost his marbles in public again," she said, dispensing with greetings. "Only the one," said Purbright agreeably, though it made quite a clatter. She raised a penciled brow. "He's been harassing local women with that camera for years. Calls it art. Most call it something else. Frankly, I'm surprised it's taken this long for someone to put a stop to it. He claims the plate was from 1949 and that it related to the Toesland inquiry." Her smile was tight. "How quaint, and entirely irrelevant. That matter was resolved. A regrettable misunderstanding about artistic licenses and petty cash." "And the photograph that never surfaced?" Purbright asked, watching her carefully. "It was inadmissible," she said crisply. "Unverified, unlogged, and more likely faked than real. Besides, there was no theft, only accounting irregularities." Purbright nodded. "Then you won't object if we request access to Archive A?" This gave her pause. "It's under temporary closure," she said. "Condensation damage. We've had to limit entry until repairs are approved. Still, perhaps you could arrange for supervised access? We're interested in a particular court box, 371A. Her fingers drummed once on the desktop. "You're chasing ghosts, Inspector. I hope you're not indulging Mr. Thrip's conspiracies. He's always fancied himself a whistleblower." "Sometimes even a cracked whistle produces a note," Purbright said gently. She didn't reply but leaned forward. "Do keep me informed, won't you?" "Of course," said Purbright. "We'd hate for the town's sense of history to be misfiled." Back in the car, Love exhaled. "She's rattled." "She's annoyed," Purbright corrected. "There's a difference. Rattled would come later, if we find proof the plate existed and was destroyed on her orders." Love frowned. "Theatre records, you think? Maybe Reg Tamlin had duplicates. Or someone else did. Don't forget, we've received 2 anonymous packages. That suggests a third party. Someone who wants this stirred. Maybe Thrip himself?" "He's too vain for subtlety," Purbright replied. "If he had the photos, he'd have published them in the Flaxborough Gazette alongside a request for donations to his exhibition." Love grunted. "So we've got an anonymous sender, a smashed plate, 2 halves returned separately, and a possible decades old cover-up." What's next? The answer came sooner than expected. As they turned onto Eastby Crescent, a small crowd had gathered outside the modest cottage of Mrs. Tamlin, widow of the late lighting engineer Reg Tamlin. A handwritten notice had been pinned to her gate. Private auction, personal effects, no dealers, and beneath it, in smaller writing, includes photo equipment, slides, archive prints, and negatives. Inquire within. Love stared. You don't suppose? Purbright was already walking toward the gate. Inside the front room, they found Mrs. Tamlin seated behind a folding table surrounded by cardboard boxes. She looked up, startled but composed. If you're here for the projector, I'm afraid it's spoken for, she said. We're not, Purbright replied. But we'd like to see any of your husband's work from the late 1940s, particularly theater or courtroom material. Her eyes narrowed. You're not the first to ask. Who was? She nodded toward the back. Man in a camel coat, day before yesterday, claimed to be from the museum. I checked, he wasn't. Took a bundle of slides and left. Paid cash. Did he leave a name? No, but he dropped something. She handed over a matchbook. On the back, scrawled in ballpoint, were the words, Lighthouse Tuesday. Bring the envelope. The matchbook, once photographed and placed in an evidence sleeve, sat quietly between the tea mugs on Purbright's desk, as though trying not to be noticed. Its front bore the logo of the Anchor Lounge, a tired pub with a jukebox older than most of its patrons, and a lighthouse silhouette that seemed, in hindsight, a touch prophetic. Bring the envelope, Love read again, aloud, as if saying it might tease out something hidden. Could refer to the first envelope we received, Purbright said, or a third one we've not yet seen. Either way, someone intends a meeting, Tuesday. That's tomorrow. Lighthouse could mean the mayor's brooch, Love offered, or the Flaxborough Society's emblem. Both feature that lighthouse symbol. Purbright gave a small smile. The society meets Tuesdays, usually at the museum, but the phrase Lighthouse Tuesday sounds more like a code name than a calendar entry. He turned to the map tacked beside the filing cabinet. There is a decommissioned signal tower near the marina. The locals still call it the Lighthouse, even though it hasn't shone in decades. Love blinked. You think someone's planning to meet there? If they're careless enough to drop a matchbook with directions on it, Purbright said dryly, they may not be thinking clearly. Before they could pursue it further, a knock interrupted them. Constable Pomeroy stepped in, clutching a brown envelope with damp corners. Just delivered by hand, sir. Found it wedged in the church notice board. Inside was a single photograph. The same court. Storage box marked 371A, this time wide open, its contents clearly visible. Several slim folders and a cloth-bound theatre prompt script. A caption was scrawled in block capitals across the margin. Who kept the script? Love's eyebrows climbed. Theatre prompt script? You think it's from the Toesland play? Or a recreation of it, Purbright murmured. Someone's trying to draw a link between performance and perjury. But what's the goal? Love said, baffled. If they've got the evidence, why not take it to the Gazette, or us? Why all the breadcrumbs? Possibly, Purbright said, folding the photo, because they need the right audience. Revenge needs spectators, Sergeant. Justice prefers witnesses. Before Love could reply, a call came through from the town hall's front desk. Councillor Dapp had just returned from an unscheduled visit to Archive A and had requested someone from the police pop by to assist with a matter of misplaced shelving. Her voice, the secretary said, had sounded particularly clipped. They arrived at the canal-side tram shed within the hour. The structure leaned slightly, like a man trying to overhear a conversation, and the scent of damp wood and old ink rolled out as the doors creaked open. Dapp stood by a row of filing cabinets, arms crossed, wearing gloves and an expression that said she'd rather be anywhere else. This cabinet, she said, gesturing to a grey metal unit that appeared otherwise untouched, has been interfered with. How so? Purbright asked. I catalogued these drawers myself back in '72. This one, she tapped a label. Theatre permits, 1947 to 1951, is out of order, and the lock's been filed. Love crouched to examine it. The keyhole had a burr inside, as if scraped by a knife tip. Not crude, but rushed. Did you find anything missing? Purbright asked. Dapp hesitated. A prompt script, green cloth cover, used in the magistrate production. It's gone. Do you recall who authored that version? Reg Tamlin adapted it from the standard text, she said reluctantly. Added some local in-jokes. Councillor Vine objected to one line, something about a safe and town funds. Said it was slander dressed in punchlines. And it was stored here. Sealed in '49, she said, voice now tight. On instruction from the then mayor, and with full council approval. That may no longer be adequate, Purbright replied softly. Dapp turned on him, eyes sharp. This is political theatre, Inspector, not police business. Whatever game is being played, leave it to the historians. We intend to, but Flaxborough's history, unfortunately, is still very much alive. As they exited the shed, Love shook his head. What now? We prepare for the meeting tomorrow, said Purbright. But tonight we do some casting. If this is a play, someone's directing it, and I'd like to know who wrote the last act. Later that evening, they returned to Mrs. Tamlin's house. She had, as promised, laid out the remaining slides and contact sheets her late husband had left behind. Among the reels were dozens of theatrical stills, faded group portraits, and a peculiar series of rehearsal shots, taken not on stage, but in what appeared to be a council room. One image showed Norman Toseland in a judge's wig, flanked by 2 council members, pretending to deliberate over a mock evidence box. On the wall behind them hung a painting, the signing of the borough charter. Love squinted. Hang on, that painting's in the council chamber. It is now, said Purbright, but in 1949 it hung in the mayor's parlour. That's not a rehearsal, that's a recreation. Someone restaged the whole trial. And who took the photo? Love asked. The contact sheet had a signature, E.T. Og. 49. Purbright tapped the initials. Eustace Thrip. He leaned back in the chair, thoughtful. So, the plate was just one of many, a scene played twice, once for the town and once for the camera. The morning air at the marina smelled faintly of creosote, damp rope, and old scandal. The so-called lighthouse, little more than a squat hexagonal tower with a boarded window and rust-stained clapboard, stood like an afterthought beside the canal's edge, its white paint blistered and streaked with gold droppings. Purbright and Love approached from the east, boots crunching over crushed shell and gravel. There was no wind, no boat traffic, only the distant sound of hammering from a nearby wharf. The town, it seemed, had yet to rouse itself. They stopped 10 yards short of the lighthouse. The iron door stood ajar. No police sign, sir, Love whispered, as if the tower might overhear him. Purbright shook his head. Whoever arranged this meeting wouldn't respond well to authority. Silence may be more persuasive. He stepped forward first, gently pushing the door. It gave with a reluctant moan. Inside, the air was cooler and tinged with the scent of damp paper. A wooden crate stood in the center of the small space. On top, a thick manila envelope, weighted by a brass slide projector lens. Love gave a low whistle. Same lens as before. Purbright examined it. Identical monogram. He picked up the envelope, checking it for tampering, then opened it carefully. Inside, 8 contact sheets, all labeled in the same neat hand. E.T., August 1949. They depicted a sequence, a mock trial, clearly staged, with townspeople standing in for legal roles. And in every image, a recurring figure, the man playing the accused, Norman Toesland. In the final frame, the judge, unmistakably Mildred Dapp, was captured passing him a slip of paper under the desk. Love gaped. So that was it. They knew it was a farce. She was coaching him. And Thrip documented it, Purbright said softly. Not just the missing plate, but the entire charade. A full rehearsal of a pre-decided verdict. They both turned at the sound of gravel outside. A man stood silhouetted in the doorway. He wore a camel coat, loosely belted, and held a thermos in one hand like a prop. His voice, when it came, was dry and faintly amused. "Inspector Purbright, I was hoping you'd be clever enough to show up without a constable in your shadow." "Then you'll be disappointed," Purbright said evenly, stepping aside. "Sergeant Love's presence is rarely avoidable." The man smiled thinly and entered. He set the thermos down on the crate. "My name is Alwyn Brackley, former town archivist, long retired. I knew Reg Tamlin. I helped him file the court documents you're chasing." "Then you know what's in these photographs?" Brackley nodded. "Every town has one performance it can't afford to remember. This one was ours." "And yet you remembered it," Purbright said. Brackley shrugged. "Someone had to. When Tamlin died, I retrieved what I could. Thought it best left sleeping. But then your Mr. Thrip started poking the ashes. And you decided to feed the flames." "I sent the envelopes," Brackley admitted. "Thrip approached me last month. Wanted to remount the trial, he said. Turn it into an exhibit for the Historical Society. Full public display. Said it would force a reckoning." Love looked doubtful. "So you... what, sabotaged him?" "I warned him," Brackley said quietly. "Told him not to use the plate, that if he did, others would take matters into their own hands." Purbright tilted his head. "And someone did." Brackley didn't respond. "But not you," Purbright added. "You're not a smasher of things. You keep them." Brackley glanced toward the contact sheets. "She'll deny it all, of course. Always has. But if those photos go public, she won't be able to." "And you want that?" Brackley hesitated. "I want accountability, not ruin. I want this town to understand what it did in the name of harmony." Love frowned. "Isn't that ruin by another name?" Purbright reached for the lens, weighed it thoughtfully in his hand. "You may get your audience yet, Mr. Brackley, but I suggest you prepare yourself. Performances are only cathartic for the crowd. For the cast, they're often fatal." As they stepped back into the sunlight, a cry echoed across the water. A boy, perhaps 9 or 10, was racing down the canal path, waving a piece of paper in the air. He stumbled to a halt before the detectives, panting. "Police?" he asked, then thrust the paper forward. "A man gave me this to deliver, said it was urgent." Purbright unfolded it. No signature, just one line, typed in uppercase. The script was never a prop. It was a confession. The paper in Purbright's hands trembled slightly in the breeze off the canal, its single sentence more chilling than a court summons. The script was never a prop. It was a confession. Love leaned in to read it again, lips silently forming the words, his brows drawing together. "Could it be metaphor?" he asked. "One of those poetic types, trying to sound dramatic." Purbright folded the paper and tucked it inside his coat. "Too direct for poetry, too precise for theatrics. It's meant to land like a verdict." "Then who wrote it?" "The person who knows what the script contains," Purbright said, "and fears we'll realize what others didn't, or wouldn't." They returned to the station without further interruption, but the silence that followed them felt deliberate, as though the town itself were holding its breath. Inside the evidence room, Purbright spread the collected photographs, envelopes, and contact sheets across the table like playing cards from a rigged deck. "The prompt script is the thread," he said quietly. "The green cloth-bound volume removed from Archive A. And if the note's correct, it wasn't just dialogue for a play. Love hovered, arms folded. Then what? A planted confession disguised as performance? Or, Purbright mused, a real confession transcribed in theatrical form to protect the speaker. Love blinked. You mean someone couldn't come forward honestly, so they dressed it up as a comedy? In Flaxborough, Purbright said, people prefer farce to confrontation. If Tamlin or Thrip helped someone stage a confession, they did it the only way the town would tolerate, under lights with applause. The phone rang. Love picked it up. After a moment, he cupped the receiver. It's Mrs. Tamlin again. She says she's found something else. Wants us to come now. Says it's best before the bin men do. They arrived within the hour. Mrs. Tamlin, in a floral housecoat and with her hair in curlers, held the item out without preamble. It was a battered theatre program from 1949, its corners softened by time. Inside, among the cast list and scene descriptions, was a page glued into the center, typed on onion skin paper and headed simply, Additional Lines, Act 3. Purbright scanned the additions. They were clumsy, overwritten, and oddly expository. Line 4, and yet I knew the money would vanish, because I saw the key in his pocket. Line 7, the lockbox was supposed to be sealed, but I watched her open it before the curtain fell. Line 12. It wasn't theft. It was choreography. But I took the blame. Purbright looked up. Did Reg write this? Mrs. Tamlin shook her head. That's not his typing, and he never talked like that. It reads like someone trying to tell a truth, but without names. Love peered over his shoulder. This sounds like someone describing the actual theft. Not just describing it, Purbright murmured. Documenting it, but safely embedded in fiction. It's a confession that only makes sense if you know the context. He turned to Mrs. Tamlin. Do you recall who played the lead that year? She nodded without hesitation. Geoffrey Bryce, council treasurer back then, died a few years after the inquiry. Heart attack, they said. Was he ever formally accused of anything? No, he left the council quietly. Got a job with an accounts firm in Grantham. Then if he wrote this, Purbright said, tapping the glued page, he may have been trying to name the real culprit, or shield someone else. Love frowned. Like Mildred Dapp? Or Toseland, Purbright added. Or both. Remember, Bryce was the treasurer. If he was ordered to misplace funds and found himself the only person willing to admit it, this might have been his way of leaving a trace. Mrs. Tamlin looked thoughtful. Reg always said the production was cursed. Props went missing. Scenes got rewritten at the last minute. He stopped attending rehearsals after opening night. Did he say why? She smiled faintly. Said it wasn't a play anymore. Said it was municipal theatre of the guilty kind. That afternoon, Purbright sent a quiet request for a theatre permit retrieval order. Officially, they were seeking lost documents of heritage interest. Unofficially, they were chasing the town's most polite scandal. But by dusk, news spread that Norman Toseland had been admitted to hospital. Chest pains, sudden onset. A neighbor reported hearing an argument earlier that day. Raised voices. Something about archive rats and old betrayals. Love brought the update in with his tea. What now, sir? Purbright looked toward the window, where the street lamps were just flickering on. Now, Sergeant, we watch who comes to his bedside. A man like Toseland rarely has visitors. And if someone does? Then they either want him to talk, Purbright said, or ensure he doesn't. The hospital's visitor log was an unimpeachable thing, kept in a dusty binder behind the front desk and guarded by a nurse who seemed personally offended by curiosity. Nonetheless, Purbright, having produced the proper clearance and his most civic of smiles, was allowed to inspect the entries for Norman Toseland's room. Two names stood out. The first was Councillor Mildred Dapp, signed in at 4:17 p.m. The second, scribbled immediately below it in a hasty, leaning hand, was Eustace Thrip, 5:09 p.m. Love squinted at the entries. Odd pair of visitors, given the last few days. Not odd, Purbright said quietly. Convergent. They waited in the ward's small waiting alcove, pretending to read old gardening magazines while keeping half an ear on the corridor. At 6:02 p.m., Eustace Thrip emerged. His walk was slower than usual, as though whatever bravado he had left had been filed down by the whitewashed walls and antiseptic lighting. His mustache drooped, the corner of his tie had been sucked into his jacket zipper and not retrieved. He didn't notice Purbright until he was already past. "Mr. Thrip," Purbright said, rising, "how lovely to run into you." Thrip started, then recovered with a cough. "Inspector, Sergeant, I was just visiting." "So we saw," Purbright said. "And earlier, Councillor Dapp. Was there a change of heart or a reunion of sorts?" Thrip gave a wavering smile. "Oh, you know, old acquaintances. We all know each other, don't we?" Purbright didn't press. "Did Mr. Toseland speak to you?" Thrip's smile dropped. "He said very little, only that I'd done it wrong." "Done what wrong?" "He didn't say, just looked at me and muttered, 'That's not how it happened.' Then he asked if I still had the shutter release cord. Can you believe that? As if it mattered now. What did you reply?" "I said I'd lost it years ago, which is true mostly." Thrip paused, then added bitterly, "He wouldn't look at me after that." Love ventured. "So, no mention of the trial, or the photographs?" Thrip shook his head. "No, only asked me not to put him in the calendar. Said he didn't want to be September." With that, he turned and walked off, shoulders curled forward like a man resisting a mild breeze. Back at the station, Purbright retrieved the script insert, the page of supposed confessional lines. He laid it beside the contact sheet of the staged trial and tapped the final image, Dapp passing the slip to Toseland. "The script was never a prop," he repeated aloud. "It was a confession, but not his." Love tilted his head. "Meaning?" "Toseland wasn't the author. Someone else wrote those lines, and he was forced to speak them." "You're saying he was made the fall guy twice, once in court, once on stage?" "Precisely. The original theft, whatever its scale, was cloaked in theatre, and the actor made to carry the truth didn't even know it was being pinned to him." Love exhaled slowly. "Then who wrote the script?" Purbright's reply was interrupted by Constable Pomeroy tapping at the door. "Sir, something odd just now. We had a call from the archivist at the Gazette. Said someone dropped off a folder in their letterbox. Anonymous. They opened it. Inside were pages from the missing green script, and 2 typed letters." He handed over a sealed evidence bag. The script pages were photocopied and partially redacted with thick black lines, but the letters were untouched. One, dated August 1950, was addressed to Reg Tamlin from Geoffrey Bryce. "Dear Reg, the lines I've slipped into the final act. They're not part of the council-approved version. You'll find them handwritten at the back of the prompt copy, under the rehearsal notes. Please don't remove them. I need this recorded, even if no one understands it yet. I can't name names. But this way, I've said what I can. If anything happens to me, you'll know where to look." GB Love let out a low breath. "That's it." "Proof," Bryce wrote the confession. "In code, sure, but with clear intent." The second letter, undated but in a different hand, read only, "They made him rewrite it before closing night." The confessional lines were struck out and replaced with a joke about sausages. "I kept the real version. I couldn't let them silence him twice." A.B. Purbright nodded once. Alwyn Brackley. The pieces were now aligning. Bryce, the treasurer, had tried to confess. Not with a whistle, but with a script, Tamlin preserved it. Brackley protected it. And Thrip, in his self-important meddling, had nearly exposed it the wrong way. But the motive remained elusive. "What's the point of it all now?" Love asked. "Everyone involved is either dead or half forgotten." "That's precisely the point," Purbright replied. "Some truths take years to ripen, and some reputations rot long after the actor leaves the stage." The final scandal arrived not as a sudden outburst or anonymous parcel, but in the most Flaxborough way imaginable, during a charity auction for the Historical Society, held in the Assembly Hall above the Cooperative Grocery. It was billed as a fundraiser for the restoration of a Saxon font no one could remember ever being used, and as such attracted precisely the sort of audience who thrived on both nostalgia and surveillance. The event was halfway through a rather spirited bidding war over a chipped tea service allegedly once owned by the town's first female chemist when the auctioneer, Mr. Fenby, held aloft the next lot, a framed photograph. He squinted at the tag. "Now then, Lot 43, donated by the late Mrs. Callow's estate, a Flaxborough classic. Council rehearsal, 1949, taken by our very own Eustace Thrip." The photo, projected on a small screen for those too far back to squint properly, showed a familiar scene. Toseland, Dapp, and Bryce in costume, acting out the faux trial. Laughter trickled through the room. "That's Mildred with the gavel, isn't it?" someone muttered. "Still wields one, if you ask me." But it wasn't the photo that drew attention. It was the detail. Purbright, seated near the back, leaned forward. He had seen this image before, on a contact sheet under poor lighting. But here, enlarged and sharp, a background figure became clear, a fourth man, half concealed behind a cabinet, looking not at the trial but at the camera. He was in shirt sleeves, not costume. Unsmiling. Watchful. Love whispered, "That Brackley?" "No," Purbright murmured. "That's Geoffrey Bryce. But if he was playing the accused, why isn't he in costume?" "Because," Purbright said slowly, "this wasn't a performance. This was the rehearsal of the performance, the one Thrip captured before the public ever saw it." The room began to stir as more people noticed. A few gasped. A woman near the front stood up abruptly and left. A man with a red rosette on his lapel muttered something about misrepresentation and stormed toward the exit. The auctioneer, sensing the change in atmosphere, lowered his gavel. "Shall we perhaps pass on this item for now?" But it was too late. Purbright rose and made his way to the front. He held up a hand. "May I see the back of the frame?" There, beneath the hanging wire, was a label. Yellowed, typed, presented by Reginald Tamlin. "Do not exhibit without contextual note. Contains unapproved rehearsal content." Purbright turned to the audience. "This photograph was never meant for public display. It was a private record of a staged confession concealed inside community theatre." Councillor Dapp, seated 2 rows in, stiffened. "That's an outrageous suggestion." Purbright met her gaze evenly. Outrageous would be suggesting Mr. Bryce's attempted confession was fabricated, which we now know it wasn't. The script lines, he added, the ones removed before closing night, are now confirmed by 2 witnesses and multiple documents. "This is hardly the place." "It is precisely the place," Purbright said quietly, "because Mr. Bryce's final request was to be heard, not as a whistleblower, but as a man pushed into silence, and this photo, submitted to auction by mistake or design, has now made that silence impossible." Love cleared his throat. "Permission to clear the room, sir." But it wasn't necessary. People were already collecting their coats, muttering to one another, scandal fermenting with every repetition. Outside, under a sudden drizzle, Purbright and Love stood watching the dispersal. "She knew," Love said after a moment. "Dapp. She's known the whole time." "Yes," Purbright replied. "And she gambled it would stay buried. Flaxborough's memory has a soft underbelly, but it's never truly forgetful. Back at the station, the final piece awaited them. A letter, hand-delivered, unsigned, but unmistakably typed on the same machine used for the earlier anonymous messages. It read, "There's one more plate, the real one, the one they struck before the gala night. Look behind the prompt table in the council chamber." Bryce hid it, said it was safer under their noses. The prompt table. They arrived at the council chamber just past 7. The building was dark, save for the emergency lights. A cleaning contractor let them in. Behind the heavy oak table where the mayor delivered opening remarks at public meetings, they found a recess, not visible from the hall, but accessible from the side. There, wrapped in cloth and wedged between 2 wooden panels, was a glass plate negative. Thrip's plate. It showed a close-up. Dap passing Toesland, the slip of paper, identical to the staged version. But this time, Bryce was visible in the foreground. He was smiling, and beneath the image, faint but legible, were the numbers etched into the corner. 371A. The glass plate lay on the evidence table like a shard of truth too delicate to touch. Even with gloves, Purbright handled it as though it might vanish if looked at too directly. The negative, once cleaned, showed what was now undeniably real. Bryce's smile, that knowing tilt of his head, the slip being passed from Dap to Toesland, all there, frozen in silver halide. A moment not acted, but orchestrated. Sergeant Love leaned over his shoulder. He knew it was all theater, didn't he? Bryce. But he smiled like it didn't matter. Purbright didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved slowly across the details, the backdrop of the council chamber, the ceremonial carpet, the old brass wall sconce casting just enough light to make the grain pop. He smiled, Purbright said at last, because the curtain was already falling. It wasn't victory. It was resignation. They enlarged the image, printed it in stages, overlaid it with the archival photos. Every detail lined up. The negative had never been doctored. No modern tampering, no retouching. It was the missing piece, and someone had gone to considerable lengths to preserve it where no one would think to look. Behind the prompt table, hidden in plain sight for decades, Purbright summoned Alwyn Brackley the following morning. The retired archivist arrived in his overcoat despite the rising heat and carried a cloth-bound folder under one arm. "I thought you might come," Brackley said, lowering himself slowly into the interview chair. "Found it then?" Purbright slid the photo across the table. "We did." Brackley stared at it for a long while. "So clean. I'd forgotten how sharp glass plates could be. Thrip was good with contrast." "Did you know it was there?" Brackley nodded. "I suspected. Bryce said he was hiding it somewhere symbolic. Said, if they want to bury truth under performance, I'll file mine under the script." Love frowned. "Why keep it secret this long?" Brackley turned toward him. "Because there was no safe way to reveal it then. You'd have needed the town to care about guilt more than appearances. That's never been Flaxborough's strong point. You could have come to us." "And handed you hearsay?" Brackley shook his head. "No, I needed the story to play out. Thrip stirred it, yes. But even he didn't know what he was doing. I gave him enough rope. He tied the knot. You pulled it tight." Purbright folded his hands. "You've curated a reckoning." "I've preserved it," Brackley corrected. "That's what archivists do, not out of revenge, out of memory." There was a pause. Then Brackley slid the folder forward. Inside were duplicates, transcriptions, annotations, letters in longhand. "Full documentation," he said. "What Bryce tried to confess, what Tamlin couldn't say out loud, what Dap buried under civic pride." Love picked up one sheet. "This one, it's typed." Brackley's voice was quiet. "Final letter. Bryce wrote it after the show closed. He died 2 weeks later." Purbright scanned the last few lines. If this reaches no one, let the silence speak louder. Let the next curtain rise honestly. It was a plea, not for punishment, but for recognition. They convened a discreet council meeting. No public statement, no press. Just the mayor, the acting archivist, 2 senior councillors, and the police. Purbright presented the plate. Councillor Dapp did not attend. A formal notice arrived from her solicitor that morning. She had resigned her post, citing irreconcilable health matters and reputational strain. Her house, the one with the blue shutters and tightly trimmed hedges, sat dark all afternoon. Love reported seeing her leave by taxi with 2 suitcases and a handbag shaped like a fish. At dusk, Purbright stood once more in the council chamber. The table had been moved slightly to the left during cleaning. Behind it, the recess where the plate had hidden now looked strangely empty, like a cavity where a tooth had been extracted. He turned to Love. "Have you prepared it?" Love nodded. Framed and labeled. No names. Just a title. Purbright gave a faint smile. "Let's hang it." By evening, a new photograph adorned the rear wall of the council chamber. Beneath it, on a brass plaque, "The Truth in Rehearsal, Flaxborough, 1949. No explanation, no scandal, just the image, displayed where truth had once been hidden. Flaxborough, by the end of the week, seemed to sigh with an almost audible relief, as though the uncovering of its long-buried scandal had ventilated some stuffy corner of its civic lungs. The rain, which had threatened for days, came and went without drama. Shopkeepers returned to their routines. The Historical Society postponed its next meeting with vague references to archival sensitivity, and someone quietly removed the tea set from the auction list and donated it to the Women's Guild instead. No official mention was made of Councillor Dapp's departure. Her office was cleared by proxy, her name removed from plaques and notice boards by silent agreement. The mayoral chain, freshly polished, was handed with polite ceremony to Councillor Horace Biddle, who accepted it with a speech so determinedly bland that not even the Gazette deemed it quotable. Sergeant Love, meanwhile, had taken it upon himself to return a few items personally: boxes borrowed from Mrs. Tamlin's cellar, contact sheets that Brackley had asked be returned to the Tamlin archive, and, most notably, the original shutter release cord, which had turned up coiled neatly inside one of Thripp's display cases at the Camera Club. It was, to Love's satisfaction, still slightly frayed at the end. "Like the whole business," he'd remarked. "Perfectly functional, just worn." In Purbright's office, the final report sat typed and unsigned. The inspector stood by the window, watching a cat gingerly navigate the roof of the greengrocer's shed. Love sat across from the desk, idly tracing the grain of the wood with his thumb. "So, what do we write, sir?" Purbright glanced over. "What do you mean?" "In the report, do we call it misconduct, fraud, historical distortion?" Purbright returned to his chair and took a moment before answering. "We call it what it was, a suppressed internal matter, now historically clarified. No prosecution, no charges, no inquiries requested." Love looked surprised. "Really?" Purbright nodded. "Flaxborough needed the truth to surface? It didn't need a reckoning. There's a difference." Love let that settle, then added, "It's strange, though. After all that effort, Bryce's confession, Tamlin's preservation, Brackley's scheming, no one gets punished." "Some truths don't require punishment," Purbright said. "Only remembering." He reached for the pen and signed the report. That afternoon, Eustace Thripp held court at the Black Swan over a half-pint of bitter and a cheese sandwich he claimed had too much memory and not enough mustard. He was, as usual, surrounded by a ring of half-curious townsfolk and opportunistic conversationalists. "I always knew there was something off about that trial," he declared to no one in particular. The angle was all wrong, composition too tidy. Truth never lines up that neatly unless someone's sweeping. Someone asked if he was working on a new project. Thrip leaned in with a conspiratorial grin. Thinking of a retrospective, actually. Working title, Faces the Town Forgot. Across the street, Mrs. Tamlin placed a new floral arrangement beneath the framed photograph in the council chamber. She said nothing, merely stood back and regarded the image with a sort of weary affection. Beside her, Alwyn Brackley adjusted the lighting slightly, just enough to ensure the plate's soft shadows caught the afternoon sun through the high window. "You think it'll stay up?" she asked. Brackley gave a small shrug. "Until they need the wall space for another commemorative tea towel." That night, as the town settled under a sky that hinted at an indecisive spring, Purbright walked the high street alone. The shops were shuttered, the puddles reflected lamplight like cracked mirrors, and somewhere a dog barked once, without conviction. He stopped outside the Gazettean office, where the editor had chosen not to run the scandal, but instead published a modest opinion piece titled "History and the Art of Waiting." It included no names, made no accusations, and ended with the line, "Sometimes what matters most is not who told the truth, but who chose to listen." Purbright smiled faintly, then turned for home. Above the council chamber, the photograph remained, a tableau of artifice and honesty, staged and sincere all at once. No longer hidden, no longer denied, just remembered.